Last October, my husband Alex and I decided to rent a lake house for a quiet weekend getaway. We live in the city, so we were looking forward to some peace and quiet. Just the two of us, surrounded by nature. The house we rented was perfect. An old but well-kept cabin right on the edge of a small lake in upstate New York. It was isolated, with no neighbors in sight, which at the time sounded ideal. We arrived on a Friday evening just as the sun was setting. The air was cool, the trees were a mix of orange and red, and the lake was so calm it looked like glass. The house itself was quaint, 2 stories with large windows overlooking the lake, a wraparound porch, and a small boathouse down by the water. It felt like the perfect escape. That night was uneventful. We made dinner, drank some wine, and went to bed early, excited to explore the area the next day. But around 2 a.m., I woke up to a strange noise, soft, almost like a tapping, but irregular. At first I thought it was an animal, maybe a raccoon or a branch brushing against the side of the house. I didn't think much of it and rolled over trying to go back to sleep. Then I heard it again, this time louder, like a distinct knock. 3 knocks, slow and deliberate, coming from the back door. I nudged Alex awake, my heart already racing. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. He listened for a second, groggy. "It's probably nothing, just the house settling," he said, half asleep. But I wasn't convinced. The knocking was too deliberate, too human. I sat up in bed, straining to hear anything else. For a few minutes, it was dead silent. I started to think maybe I was just imagining things when, suddenly, we both heard it. Footsteps. Slow, heavy footsteps on the porch outside our bedroom window. Alex sat up now, wide awake. "Who's out there?" he whispered, his voice tense. We both stayed completely still, listening as the footsteps moved from the back of the house to the side, then to the front porch. I grabbed my phone and checked the time. 2:24 a.m. No service, of course. We were frozen, neither of us knowing what to do. It wasn't like we were expecting anyone. This was a secluded lake house, miles from town. There shouldn't have been anyone out there. The footsteps stopped directly in front of our bedroom window, just outside the glass. I felt sick to my stomach. Whoever it was, they were standing there, watching us, separated only by a thin pane of glass. Alex got out of bed as quietly as he could and crept toward the window, peeking through the curtains. His face went pale. He motioned for me to come over, but I shook my head, terrified of what I might see. He whispered, "There's a man out there." I felt a surge of panic. "What does he want?" "I don't know," Alex replied, his voice shaky. "He's just standing there." I didn't want to look, but my curiosity got the best of me. I slowly crept toward the window and pulled the curtain back, just a tiny bit. Sure enough, there was a man standing on the porch. He was facing the window, wearing a hooded jacket and jeans, but I couldn't see his face in the darkness. He wasn't moving, just standing there, like he was waiting for something. That's when he knocked again. 3 slow, deliberate knocks on the window. I stumbled back, my heart pounding in my chest. Alex grabbed my arm and whispered, "We need to call someone." But we had no cell service, no landline. We were completely cut off. The man knocked again, louder this time, like he was growing impatient. I gestured for Alex to follow me downstairs, and we quietly made our way to the front door, planning to check the locks. As we reached the bottom of the stairs, we heard it, the back door rattling. Someone was trying to open it. Alex rushed over and checked the lock. It was still secure, but the door shook as the handle jiggled violently. Whoever was out there was trying to get inside. Suddenly, the rattling stopped. Everything went silent. We stood there in the dark, barely breathing, waiting for something, anything, to happen. After a few minutes, I dared to peek out of the small window near the front door, but the porch was empty. The man was gone, or so I thought. Alex motioned for me to stay put while he checked the rest of the house. He went room to room, making sure everything was locked and secure. When he got to the living room, I heard him mutter something under his breath. I rushed over to see what it was. The back door was wide open. I felt the blood drain from my face. We had both checked it. It had been locked, I was sure of it. But now, it stood open, the cold night air blowing in. Alex grabbed a fireplace poker, the only thing we had that could be used as a weapon, and slowly stepped outside. I stayed inside, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst. He came back a few minutes later, shaking his head. "No one's out there," he said, but I could tell by the look in his eyes that he was just as scared as I was. We barricaded the door and stayed awake the rest of the night, huddled together on the couch, listening to every creak and groan of the old house. Neither of us could shake the feeling that the man was still out there, watching us from the shadows. The next morning, we packed up and left as soon as the sun came up. I've never been that scared in my life. We still don't know who that man was, how he opened the door, or what he wanted. But every now and then, I think about those knocks, the way they sounded so calm, so deliberate, like he knew we were inside, waiting for him to come in. Last fall, my girlfriend Lisa and I rented a lake house for a long weekend. It wasn't a fancy Airbnb or anything, just a small cabin I found through a friend of a friend. The price was cheap, the location was perfect, and we wanted to escape the city for a few days. The house sat right on the edge of a small, secluded lake in Vermont, surrounded by woods, and the closest town was a good 20-minute drive. We got there on a Friday afternoon, and everything seemed fine. The house was old but charming, with a big deck that looked out over the lake and a small fire pit right by the water. It was a perfect fall day, with the leaves changing colors and a crisp breeze. After unloading our stuff, we spent the evening by the fire, drinking wine and talking. The lake was completely still, and the woods were quiet, except for the occasional rustle of leaves. It wasn't until the sun went down that things started to feel strange. As we were sitting by the fire, I noticed movement in the distance, just across the lake. At first, I thought it was an animal, but then I realized it was a person, a man, standing on the opposite shore, right on the edge of the water. He wasn't moving, just standing there, staring in our direction. I nudged Lisa and pointed him out. "Do you see that?" She squinted and nodded. "Yeah, that's weird. Do you think he's camping over there?" There weren't any houses on the other side of the lake, just dense woods. I figured maybe he was a hiker or someone who had set up camp, but something about the way he stood there, so still, watching us, made me uneasy. I waved, but he didn't respond, didn't move. He just kept staring. After a few minutes, we decided to go inside. I tried to shake off the feeling of being watched, telling myself it was just some guy enjoying the view, but the whole situation had me on edge. The next day, we spent most of our time hiking around the area, exploring the trails that looped through the woods behind the house. By the time we got back, the sun was starting to set, and we decided to start another fire. I glanced across the lake again, but the man was gone. I felt a little better, thinking maybe he'd left, but the uneasy feeling from the night before still lingered. We cooked dinner, drank more wine, and sat by the fire again, but the vibe wasn't the same. Both of us were a little jumpy, even though we didn't say it out loud. We tried to make conversation, but every now and then, I caught Lisa glancing over her shoulder toward the lake. Around 10 p.m., we decided to call it a night. I doused the fire, and we headed back inside. Lisa went to bed, but I stayed up for a bit, flipping through some old magazines that had been left in the cabin. I couldn't sleep, my mind racing with thoughts about the man from the night before. Who was he? Why was he just standing there? Then, just as I was about to turn in, I heard something, a faint noise coming from outside. At first, I thought it was the wind, but then I heard it again. A shuffling sound, like footsteps on gravel. I froze, listening. The sound grew louder, coming from the side of the house. I grabbed my phone and walked to the window, pulling back the curtain just enough to see outside. There, standing by the fire pit, was the same man. He was closer this time, just standing there, looking right at the house. My heart was pounding. I stepped away from the window and rushed to wake Lisa. "Hey, there's someone outside," I whispered, shaking her awake. She sat up, groggy. "What? Who?" "It's the same guy from last night. He's standing by the fire pit." Lisa's face went pale. We both crept back to the window, but by the time we looked out again, he was gone. The fire pit was empty. I grabbed a flashlight and went outside, against Lisa's protests. I shined the light around the yard, down by the lake, into the woods, but there was no sign of him. Just darkness and silence. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still out there, watching us. We locked the doors and windows and spent the rest of the night in the living room, too scared to sleep. Every little creak and groan of the old house made us jump, and we kept the lights on until morning. The next day, we were supposed to stay one more night, but we decided to leave early. As we packed up the car, I walked down to the fire pit one last time, still feeling uneasy. That's when I saw it, a pile of rocks, carefully stacked in the center of the fire pit. They hadn't been there the night before. Someone had been there, and they'd left a message. We didn't stick around to find out what it meant. We drove out of there as fast as we could, and I haven't been back to that lake since. Last fall, my wife Erica and I rented a lake house in northern Wisconsin for a long weekend. We'd been looking forward to it for weeks. Some time away from work, no phones, no distractions. Just us. The house was isolated, surrounded by thick trees, with no other cabins or houses visible from the property. The lake was small and serene, perfect for a quiet, relaxing trip. We arrived on a Friday evening just as the sun was setting. The air was crisp, and the leaves were starting to turn. The house looked even better in person than it did in the pictures. Rustic but well kept, with big windows overlooking the lake. As we pulled up to the gravel driveway, I noticed the front porch light was on, which I found a little odd. The rental company hadn't mentioned that anyone would be there before us, but I figured they just left it on to welcome us. When we walked up to the front door, it was unlocked. I turned to Erica, raising an eyebrow. "Didn't they say the key would be in the lockbox?" I asked, confused. "Maybe the last guests forgot to lock it," she replied, but there was a slight tension in her voice. Neither of us liked the idea of walking into an unlocked house in the middle of nowhere, but we brushed it off. We were excited to get settled in and start our weekend. We stepped inside and immediately noticed something was off. The living room looked like someone had just been there. There were a couple of dirty plates on the coffee table, an open magazine, and a half-full glass of water sitting on the side table, next to a blanket draped over the couch. "Maybe the cleaning crew hasn't come through yet," Erica suggested, but she didn't sound convinced. I walked into the kitchen and froze. There was a pot on the stove, still half full of some kind of soup. It was cold now, but the remnants were fresh, as if someone had cooked here that very morning. "Something's not right," I muttered. "No one's supposed to be here." Erica and I exchanged a look. The house felt wrong, like we weren't supposed to be there. I tried calling the rental company to figure out what was going on, but of course, there was no cell service this deep in the woods. "We should check the rest of the house," Erica said quietly. I nodded, not liking the idea, but knowing we couldn't just leave without checking if someone was still inside. We moved cautiously through the house, checking the bedrooms and the bathroom. Everything seemed normal, aside from the mess in the living room. But as we reached the second floor, we found the door to the master bedroom cracked open, just a sliver of darkness beyond it. My stomach twisted. I slowly pushed the door open wider, and that's when I saw it, a suitcase lying open on the bed. Clothes were neatly folded inside, like someone had been living here. And next to the suitcase, on the bedside table, was a phone charger plugged into the wall. Someone had been staying here. Recently. "Let's get out of here," I whispered to Erica, my heart racing. "We're not alone." We hurried downstairs, grabbing our bags, ready to leave. But just as we reached the front door, we heard it. A car pulling up the gravel driveway. My heart nearly stopped. Someone was outside. We froze, listening as the car engine shut off, and the sound of footsteps crunched toward the house. I peeked through the curtains and my stomach dropped. A man and a woman were walking up to the door, carrying groceries like they owned the place. "What the hell?" I whispered. "Who are they?" Erica grabbed my arm. "We need to leave, now." Before we could move, the front door swung open, and the couple stepped inside. They froze when they saw us, their faces a mix of shock and confusion. "Who the hell are you?" the man barked, dropping the grocery bags on the floor. His eyes were wild, and his face flushed with anger. "We rented this place," I stammered. "The rental company—" "This is our house," the woman interrupted, her voice shaking. "We've been living here for weeks. What the hell are you doing here?" I felt a cold sweat break out on my neck. "The rental company told us—" "They didn't tell you shit," the man snarled, stepping toward us. "Get the hell out of our house, now!" We grabbed our bags, backing toward the door. I could see the tension in the man's body, like he was ready to explode. I didn't want to argue. We needed to leave. Fast. Just as we reached the door, Erica whispered, "Look at their car." I glanced outside. The car was an old beat-up sedan, covered in dirt and rust. No plates. My blood ran cold. Something was very, very wrong. We bolted for the door, not looking back. The man shouted something, but I didn't hear it. All I could think about was getting out of that house. We jumped into our car, peeled out of the driveway, and didn't stop until we were miles down the road, finally reaching a spot with cell service. When I called the rental company, they confirmed what I feared. No one was supposed to be in that house. The couple living there? No idea who they were. They'd broken in. We never found out who they really were or how long they'd been staying there. All I know is, if we hadn't left when we did, I don't think we'd have made it out.